Hi everyone, this is Chris Vella again with Noble Savage. As always, please like and subscribe. Please support our sponsor, Active Articulation. And this is episode 1 of our series on 1619. So, 1619. Already having trouble. 1619, alright. So, why 1619? Well, the conception of America as we know it today. And the world, the Western world, I should say, the Western world as we know it. Alrighty, so what's the first notable event? Because we're going to give everything that happened in like context, right? So the first notable event really happened on January 12th, right? All right, it happened in England. Surprise, surprise. So let's start. Basically, this is going to be the story of how the Banqueting House at Whitehall burnt down, quote unquote, the fire at the English Banqueting House at Whitehall in 1619. Fire at Whitehall, let's say. $1619. Okay, and you might be wondering why is that relevant? Well, let's start. First off, we're giving the world context, and this illustrates nepotism to an astounding degree, especially in context. The more context you give this, you wonder, wow, this still happened. You're like, how did this still happen? It's very remarkable, essentially, and we're going to try to give it context here today. So first, gonna have to talk about King James. All right. We can call him the King James. See how much context is important. This is the King James, like, of the King James Bible, right? But at the time, he was known as King James the First and Sixth. Okay. So who's that guy? Who's King James the First and Sixth? King James the First and Sixth. King James the First and Sixth. Let's attempt some drawing of King James the First and Sixth. So this guy was the product of a marriage. I'm doing terrible at this drawing. He's the product of a marriage of the monarchs of England and Ireland. So there was one set of monarchs for England and Ireland at the time of his conception. And Scotland, right? So basically, what? So those two monarchs got together so that their offspring would rule both sections of land, right? So that's really normal historically, that you essentially get like a vague type of feudalism where you got this guy, this is King James, all right? He's Um, it's kind of normal, especially at this time in history, in 1619, I mean, but in context, it's normal all times in history, that basically have a king, right? And everyone within his domain, and even many people, everyone within his domain is expected to listen to him, basically. So you got little people. Sorry, you can't see what I'm doing here. You got little people over here. Okay, this is kind of how it's set up. They're expected to listen to this guy. All right. And there are people higher up in the totem pole, but they all get their authority from this guy, because this guy somehow he has the loyalty of the powers that be. So it would be, basically the military, let's say, and whatever he basically would use that military, or that his ancestor used that military to take advantage of, which would, in modern parlance, amount to a lot of wealth, a lot of power, a lot of ability to do what you want and get people to do what you want. And all these people, they're born into positions, at least 9 out of 10 of these people. 9 out of 10 of these people, I'm doing everything backwards, which is fine. 9 out of 10 of these people are born into positions that they're going to die in. There's some space for change, but there isn't a lot. A lot of people are illiterate. But King James, the first and sixth, the first of England and Ireland and the sixth of Scotland, I believe, he was actually pretty helpful to his people. He was unpopular at the time because, like I said, so he was a combo birth for the monarchy. So to the Scottish, he was English and Irish. To the English and Irish, he was Scottish, and things like that. And the English and Irish already don't get along. But they were attempting, you can see what they were attempting here. But also, so first off, let's start. So he was in the line of kings post the Protestant Reformation in Britain, in England, let's say. So essentially, he created the King James Bible. He was somebody, maybe it was due to the fact that he was sort of criticized for already being kind of an unconventional choice for a king of England or Scotland or what have you. He created the King James Bible, and it's sort of like, it was a standard Bible for for England, and many people still use it as a standard Bible. Many people still live and die by the words this man wrote, or whoever he commissioned to write it. Let me make sure that that's cool. Yeah. Anyway, so what? So what does that matter? Well, these are very religious people, obviously, and they wouldn't print anything if they didn't print a Bible, first off. Second off, he translated the Bible into English. So basically, a lot of people that were illiterate before would learn to read just to read the Bible, and a lot of people who had never read the Bible could now read it themselves and not be lied to about what they believed the Word of God was. So it creates more equality, like existential equality, that creates more wealth equality, in fact. So what? So he helped a lot with that. He created the King James Bible, different factions tried to claim him for their own today because of the modernizing effect this man had. So, yeah. So we got King James the first and the sixth. He's like a trailblazer, especially for his time, and we still, many people still live and die by his word today. What else? What else is there about him? I think I did most of it. Just know that his basically time as king was marked by basically low taxes, his disinterest in basically being king, and more his interest in like writing. Like Shakespeare happened while he was reigning, and yeah, some people really hate him and blame him for the English Civil War that happened later. Yeah, and essentially that's the type of character this person is. He is an odd one out in how different he is, in how he was separating himself from Rome and the Catholics, and how he was teaching people to read and letting people read, and okay. And this is a story about how he's kind of an old world nepotistic crazy person. So let's continue. So we've got King James. We just went on about King James. And we've got someone called, let's say it's this guy, okay? Robert Stickles. I can't spell his names. So this is some like random papist middleman, essentially. And he, most likely, they're not even sure, designed the original Whitehall Banqueting Hall, right? So why is this relevant? So this was back when the British were with the Pope, and when King James the First and Sixth was in charge, he wasn't with the Pope, and he was specifically not being with the Pope, and writing books about, a whole, not a whole different Bible, but a new translation of the Bible, separate from the Catholic one. And obviously all the buildings that were built by the previous administrations didn't immediately evaporate or change, and that kind of doesn't go well with the idea of kingship, because the king it abstractly is supposed to be equal to God. That's kind of an ancient situation, and that's why he can create the law. Okay? So the fact that when they just sort of make these proclamations, things don't immediately change, kind of, screws with the whole idea, their whole idea of political science and political philosophy, essentially. So, and lastly, we have, we got Inigo Jones, all right? Okay, let's just draw us some Inigo Jones. Is that you, Inigo? Is that you? I'm drawing him as I imagine him. It's a sad shell of a man listening to King James. You can admire King James all you want. I would hate to be a king's servant, let me tell you. Oh, there's a human here, I think. That, or it might just be heating. Anyway, I'm almost done, sort of, I think. So. Anyway, so this is Inigo Jones. So we'll talk about how Inigo Jones comes up later. So So you must be wondering, why does this matter? Well, Whitehall right here, this one. This was basically like the White House for England, right? And at this point, the guy in charge of England was in charge of Scotland and Ireland too. So this guy, he's running 3 nations, okay? This is like the White House of 3 nations, 3 powerful nations, the greatest seafaring empire the world has ever known, all right? And they have a banqueting hall. And because you have to understand that basically, so it's like the White House if the same guy lived in the White House all his life. Like, so it's not pure bureaucracy, it's like a lived-in home, right? And the banqueting hall would be where they would have guests, where the king and queen of Wales would come with their crew, let's say, and eat with the king of England. And so apparently this guy, who we don't know what he looked like really, because he's just some random papist middleman, he had designed the banqueting house at Whitehall, and King James had gone through there, and he thought that the pillars holding up the building were a little bit too close to the windows, and so he didn't like it. And this guy, being a Catholic, wasn't really a factor anymore. So apparently, after he had a party of some sort there, he had some guests. It just burned down mysteriously. The servants, while burning the rubbish, burned part of their government building to the ground. You can assume it was at the whim of King James, because none of the servants were punished. And yeah. And then he got this guy to rebuild it, to rebuild the building that he just burnt down. This poor man. But because King James was trying to separate the English, the British, I'm not even sure they were Britain yet. I think the landmass was called Britain, and it still is, right? But basically, he was trying to separate them from the Romans, and this guy got to be kind of creative. And he was probably like one of the only 10 guys in the nation that were allowed to, because of how this all works. Do you see what I'm saying? So this guy, being like a trailblazer on one side, he's also a conservative psychopath on the other. He doesn't really think twice about it. And don't get me wrong, as a king, he can't. That was just the situation as it was. Like, he did help his people. He was protecting his people from a giant empire that wanted to take over. And he did unite. He did prove that warring peoples could live by one set of laws. And I don't think you can blame a single person for a civil war. Even, I think that learning things like that you can't blame specific people for entire nations is part of why we transitioned out of monarchies. So I think that's the end of the story for today. It's just the banqueting hall was burnt down in England, their big bad banqueting hall, and that's kind of how like everyone in all 3 of those nations that this single guy ran things in had to live with their government working. Like, oh, I don't like this place, burn it down. Oh, no, don't write down that we're going to burn it down. Just burn it down and say there was a fire and that it magically burnt down with the trash. I swear that's exactly how they did things. I think my phone's running out of battery, and that's why it's doing this. So what? Yeah, and you can see what this illustrates. So, oh yes, and the last thing is that this guy was the guy who started colonizing North America on behalf of England. So we're already on track. And I'll edit this together in a couple of hours, and I'll see you tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow. I'll see you in like a week, but I'll come out with a new episode fairly soon. See you. I had 1% left on my phone. That's hilarious. Have a good night, guys.